The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace was nearly empty now. Candlelight flickered across gilded walls, spilling warm gold over the polished marble floors. The faint scent of roses lingered in the air, mingling with the soft perfume of Queen Charlotte and the faint, familiar aroma of polished wood. Outside, the night was deep and still, but inside, a quiet tension vibrated between the two figures at the center of the room. Queen Charlotte stood near a tall mirror, adjusting the delicate folds of her gown. Her reflection caught her eye, and she studied herself, not for vanity, but for readiness. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her, the heavy mantle of royalty, and yet beneath it, a quieter, more urgent pulse of emotion, anticipation, curiosity, and a longing she had kept carefully restrained. Across the room, King George watched her with measured restraint. His posture was impeccable, the lines of his uniform sharp and exact, but there was a subtle softness in his gaze that no ceremonial rigidity could hide. For months, he had maintained the stoic mask of a monarch, hiding any flicker of desire, yet now, in the quiet aftermath of the evening's formalities, that mask was beginning to crack. Their eyes met, and in that brief, charged moment, the distance between them felt smaller than the vast expanse of the ballroom. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. George's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching, an unspoken question and an equally unspoken answer passing between them. George stepped closer, deliberate, each movement measured yet infused with an invisible gravity that drew Charlotte in without a word. She felt the warmth of his presence before he touched her, a magnetic pull that defied propriety. Their hands hovered near each other, almost touching, and Charlotte could feel the tremor of anticipation that ran like electricity through her veins. "You look remarkable tonight," George said softly, his voice low, carefully controlled. Even in words so simple, there was a weight, a subtle tension that went far beyond the compliment itself. Charlotte inclined her head, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "And you, as always, are imposing," she replied, her tone carefully measured, but her heart betrayed the warmth behind her words. George reached out, lifting her hand with gentle care. His fingers brushed against hers, and the faint contact sent a shiver up Charlotte's arm. She closed her eyes briefly, savoring the quiet intimacy of the touch, the electricity that seemed to pass between them with no need for further words. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, yet she did not. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, allowing the softest hint of invitation. Their lips met with delicate hesitation, a brush of warmth and curiosity that spoke more than any conversation could. Candlelight caught the curve of Charlotte's cheek and the firm line of George's jaw, emphasizing the human vulnerability beneath the royal decorum. The kiss deepened gently, exploratory and lingering, as though time itself had slowed around them. Charlotte felt the tension she had carried for months dissolve in the warmth of that single, stolen moment. George felt the same release, his usual composure giving way to an honesty he rarely permitted himself. In the quiet of the ballroom, with only the soft rustle of silk and the whisper of breath as accompaniment, they discovered a connection that transcended protocol, a brief but profound acknowledgement of their shared humanity. When they finally parted, Charlotte's eyes shone with an emotion she had rarely allowed herself to display. Her hand lingered in George's, a silent acknowledgement that this moment had altered the course of their relationship. George steadied himself, heart racing, aware that this brief intimacy had changed everything. The grand ballroom seemed to exhale with them, shadows softening, candlelight flickering in harmony with the rhythm of their hearts. Outside, the night remained still, but inside, the world felt alive with possibility, suspended between desire and duty, between the personal and the ceremonial. Charlotte drew a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the warmth of George's hand against hers. Even in that quiet moment, she was acutely aware of the expectations that hung over them, the unspoken demands of royalty, the ever-watchful eyes of history, the weight of appearances. And yet, all of that seemed to fall away in the intimate cocoon of the candlelit ballroom. She could feel the softness of George's gaze, the unguarded flicker of something almost tender in his expression, and it made her pulse quicken. George noticed the subtle shiver that ran through her, the way her fingers twitched slightly under his. Every instinct told him to step back, to maintain the dignity and distance required of a king, but every heartbeat urged him closer. His thoughts were a tangle of restraint and desire. He had governed kingdoms, commanded armies, negotiated with some of the most formidable figures in Europe, yet the simple act of holding Charlotte's hand made him feel exposed, vulnerable, alive in a way that no political victory ever had. He leaned in again, a fraction closer this time, careful to respect the line between propriety and intimacy. Charlotte's eyes fluttered closed, and in that simple act of trust, George felt a surge of emotion that was both intoxicating and terrifying. Their breaths mingled in the quiet space between them, each inhale and exhale a delicate rhythm, a silent communication that no words could convey. "You shouldn't," Charlotte began, then stopped herself. The caution in her voice was real, a whisper of royal responsibility, yet it was tinged with curiosity and longing. "I know," George replied softly, pressing his forehead briefly against hers. His hand remained clasped around hers, warm and grounding. "But sometimes, we must follow what we feel." Her heart fluttered at the quiet authority in his words, a command tempered by vulnerability. Charlotte had spent her life balancing duty with desire, never allowing the two to meet so openly. And yet, here, in this quiet palace chamber, all the careful rules seemed suddenly irrelevant. She tilted her head slightly, inviting the next contact, and George answered instinctively. Their lips met again, this time with more certainty, a slow, deliberate movement that spoke of mutual understanding. Charlotte felt a rush of emotions, anticipation, relief, exhilaration, and an almost dizzying tenderness. Every nerve in her body seemed alive, every thought sharpened, every sensation magnified. George's hands moved gently, brushing against the back of her wrist, the warmth of his touch grounding her even as the intensity of the moment threatened to sweep her away. The candlelight reflected off the polished floors, creating golden halos around them. Their shadows intertwined on the walls, dancing with the rhythm of their slow, measured movements. Charlotte felt herself leaning into him, the silk of her gown whispering against the smooth marble as she shifted slightly closer. George responded in kind, his movements careful, considerate, every touch deliberate, every gesture weighted with unspoken meaning. For a few timeless moments, the world outside the ballroom ceased to exist. There were no royal obligations, no political pressures, no expectations of courtly behavior. There was only the quiet intimacy of two hearts, two minds, two souls daring to acknowledge a connection that had been simmering for months. When they finally parted again, it was only slightly, enough to meet each other's eyes. Charlotte's gaze was bright, almost luminous with emotion. George's expression, usually so controlled, betrayed a rare softness, a glimpse of the man beneath the crown. Their hands remained entwined, a subtle rebellion against the distance that duty demanded. Charlotte whispered, almost to herself, "I never imagined it could feel like this." George smiled faintly, a rare, almost shy smile, and pressed his lips gently to the back of her hand. "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice low, intimate, as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile perfection of the moment. The ballroom seemed to exhale with them. Shadows softened, candlelight danced along the walls, and the night outside seemed to pause in reverent stillness. In the privacy of this golden chamber, two hearts had spoken a language older than words, a language of trust, longing, and fragile human vulnerability. The soft golden glow of the candles seemed to wrap around Charlotte and George, cocooning them in a world apart from the obligations of court life. Charlotte's hand remained in George's, though the gentle pressure of his fingers felt like both reassurance and a silent promise. She could feel the steady beat of his pulse through the thin fabric of his glove, a rhythm that somehow mirrored her own, faster and uneven, yet measured with restraint. George's eyes traced the line of Charlotte's jaw, the curve of her cheek illuminated by candlelight. Every detail felt amplified in the quiet intimacy of the room, the faint glint of her earrings, the soft blush on her skin, the way her eyes, so full of composure in public, now glimmered with vulnerability. He realized that in this moment, there were no kings or queens, no titles or duties, there was only them, fragile and human. Charlotte felt the heat of his gaze on her, a warmth that traveled beyond the surface, settling somewhere deep within her chest. She could feel